welcome to all of you, lovers of New York City, history, architecture, and dance. Gathered here together to celebrate the life and work of choreographer Jerome Robbins here at his one-time home and studio. I'm Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel, the chair of the New York State Council on the Arts and the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center, a group of dedicated individuals committed to informing the public about the past, present, and future of historic preservation in our city. Our warmest thanks to Miggs and Bing Wright, the owners of this lovely building, and to all of you for joining us here today. Jerome Robbins, born Jerome Robbins, was the younger of two children, Lena Roos and Harry Rabinowitz, an immigrant from Poland. Raised on the Upper East Side, the Robbins family moved to New Jersey in the 1920s, where his father and uncle established a corset company. After graduating from Woodrow Wilson High School in 1935, Robbins attended NYU. As the Depression worsened, he dropped out and began to pursue a career in show business, following the path forged by his sister Sonia, who performed professionally. He obtained an apprenticeship with Senya Sanders' Modern Dance Company and changed his last name to Robbins. The theatrical and expressive style of Groupe Stylure suited Robbins, who believed in, quote, the freedom to make up my own dances without inhibition or doubts. In 1937, Robbins began dancing and choreographing at Tamamut, a progressive movement summer resort in Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountains. We produced a variety of dances, from burlesque-like blackout sketches to pieces with strong political content, like Strange Fruit, set to Miracle's song about a lynching. In 1940, after working in the Broadway choruses, he was accepted into the recently formed Ballet Theater, later known as the American Ballet Theater, where he soon advanced to solo roles. Eager to choreograph his own ballet with an American theme to American music, Robbins came up with the idea for a ballet about three sailors on shore leave in New York City. To write the score, he sought out the services of the then unknown composer, Leonard Bernstein, and the rest, as they say, is history. In 1944, Fancy Free premiered at the Metropolitan Opera House to 24 enthusiastic curtain calls, and in December of that year, On the Town, a musical comedy based on the ballet, with music by Bernstein and choreographed by Robbins, opened on Broadway. From the fairy tale debut until his death more than 50 years later, Robbins' stature was assured. In 1949, he left the Ballet Theater to join George Balanchine's newborn New York City Ballet. While there, he choreographed dramatic ballets like the lyrical masterpiece Afternoon of a Faun in 1953. His non-stop choreographic work on Broadway continued as well. Call Me Madam, 1950, The King and I, 1951, The Pajama Game, 1954, Peter Pan, 1954, a very busy year, Bells Are Ringing, 1956, and the film version of The King and I in 1956 as well. In 1957, he once again teamed up with Leonard Bernstein on what some have called the first concept musical, the award-winning West Side Story. The astounding trajectory of his career was unimpeded by his appearance in 1953 before the House Un-American Activities Committee, where he admitted to membership in the Communist Party. During the 1930s, and named 8 individuals who had also been members. While some have said that he did so to avoid being outed as a homosexual, his cowardly testimony was regarded as putting others at risk, but it also meant that he could avoid the U.S. government's blacklisting of many left-leaning artists during this period, and thus continued to work. After West Side Story, Robbins left New York City Ballet and formed his own company, Ballet USA, which appeared at the Festival of Two Worlds in Spoleto, Italy in 1958. Despite enthusiastic notices and a performance at the Kennedy White House, the company never found its audience and was disbanded by 1961. Still sought after on Broadway, in 1964, his work as choreographer and director on Fiddler on the Roof brought to life Sholem Alechem's humorous and poignant stories about the Russian-Jewish battle in the late 19th century. 2 years later, with the help of a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, Robbins founded the American Theater Lab, exploring experimental dance and theater. In 1969, he reemerged as City Ballet with Dances in a Gallery in 1969, widely received as a masterpiece. The next decades saw continued experimentation, including work set to contemporary music, such as Glass Pieces, 1983, and works inspired by the classicism of Bach, like the youthful and bouncy, that's what it was called, by the New York Times, Brandenburg, set to the Bach concertos, which premiered in 1997 with Wendy Whalen. In 1998, though already in fragile health, Robbins insisted on staging Les Notres for City Ballet. It was his last work. As Chevalier of the French Legion of Honor, Robbins received 5 Donaldson Awards, 5 Tony Awards, 2 Academy Awards, 1 Emmy, and the Kennedy Center Honors, and numerous other prizes. On the evening of his death, on July 29, 1998, the lights of Broadway dimmed for a moment and flickered. And now, our distinguished speakers. We will begin with Jennifer Homans, please come forward, who is the founder and director of the Center for Ballet and the Arts at New York University, where she is also a distinguished scholar in residence of history and European and Mediterranean studies, the author of the widely admired Apollo's Angels, A History of Ballet. She was named one of the New York Times 10, which was named one of the New York Times 10 best books of the year. And this was the dance critic in the New Republic from 2001 to 2015. But she still became a writer and scholar. Jennifer Homans was a professional dancer and performed with the Pacific Northwest Ballet and other companies. The recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship in 2012, she is currently working on a new book, Lord Balancing History, to be published by Random House. I'm very pleased to introduce
Thank you very much, Barbaralee. I'm very honored to be here and grateful for the opportunity to say a few words about Jerome Robbins. I'm also a little bit humbled by speaking with all of these people who know so much more than I do about this subject. I guess what I'd like to do is just say a few words about Jerome Robbins and George Balanchine, since Balanchine is somebody who's very much in my mind these days. And if you think about it, in many ways they just couldn't have been more different. Robbins was American, Jewish, on the political left, temperamentally tormented, many would say. Certainly very psychological and deeply self-involved. George Balanchine was Russian Orthodox, Russian, anti-communist, conservative sensibilities. He was temperamentally known to be calm, detached, a bit removed, always polite. But if you think about it in another way, they both also had Russian roots, even though they came from very different Russias. Balanchine was from the Tsar's Russia, the Imperial Theater School, the Orthodox faith. Robbins was from the Russia of the Pale, of pogroms, of death and murder, of profound anti-Semitism, and of necessary flight. But all of these differences may actually not be the main point, because they also had lots of things in common. They both had, in some way, Robbins through family, Balanchine through history, fled Russia. One in exile, one an immigrant. And although both of them embraced America and were in many ways very American, they were also outsiders and in some way uneasy with the country that they had in common. What's extraordinary to me is that they created together, only not quite together, because it was really Balanchine's creation, a little society, a little community, a village on the Hudson called the New York City Valley. And they lived in it together for most of their professional lives. But we have to be clear that the New York City Valley was Balanchine's fantasy. And what Robbins did, which it's hard to imagine in a way. Here is an artist that had his own vision, who was a major figure, who was an original thinker. None of us would, I'm sure we would all agree about that, but he made the decision to live inside Balanchine's fantasy. And Balanchine made the decision to invite him. What could be more intimate than that? To invite someone into your own fantasy, into your own little society, into the world that you were creating. So the fact that they both made this decision and that they stuck it out together for so many years seems to me quite extraordinary. It wasn't ever, it's not an easy relationship to describe. It wasn't really father and son. It wasn't really mentor and mentee, because Robbins was too independent for that, even though he was never in any doubt about whose talent was the greater. It wasn't really a collaboration. There were tensions constantly, as we all know, and it wasn't a collaboration the way Balanchine had a collaboration with Stravinsky or Robbins had a collaboration with Bernstein. I think of it more as a kind of marriage, because it was generous and joyful and troubled and anguished, with many breaks and many moments of recommitment. It's interesting to me that they never had a contract, and at the one moment when Robbins said, "We need a contract," Balanchine said, "No, we don't need a contract." They already had one. It was unspoken. And so, what I'm thinking about this idea of living inside someone else's fantasy is that it was an act, in a way, on Robbins' part of self-sacrifice. But it was also something that brought him great creativity and productivity. And it brought out in him a very, very generous side. I want to just quote to you briefly from an interview that was done during the Stravinsky Festival, in which Balanchine and Robbins were together being interviewed. And at one point, they speak very warmly and intimately of each other, and then Balanchine leaves the room, and Robbins says, "It's Tuesday, and the ballet Pulcinella opens on Friday. The scenery's not all here. The costumes aren't here. The dancers have never been on the stage yet. No one's heard the music. In all my experience of working on Broadway shows, I have never seen anything comparable. Nothing, never." And then the interviewer says, "Well, how is it all happening and who's paying for it?" And she insists on this question of who's paying for it. And Robbins becomes extremely annoyed and short. And he says, "No, money didn't make it possible. That man makes it possible." It would be nice if someone would say, that's a gigantic thing that has been achieved for our country, for our culture. In the future, no one will remember the figure, the cost. They will remember the event. It is that man and his leadership and the unassuming way he has led us. He is not what you would call a man of great oration, and there's no such thing as pep talks, and we've all got to get in there together. He's a man who, by his own personality and his own dedication and his own humanity, has shown us how to follow his lead. Which is an extraordinary statement from an artist who was also making his own lead and bringing so many people along with him. So I just wanted to leave that as a tribute to Robbins and to his great and expansive imagination that was able to live inside someone else's fantasy and create within it one of his own. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer Holmes. Our next speaker is biographer, journalist, and screenwriter Amanda Vale. She is the author of Somewhere, The Life of Jerome Robbins, for which she received a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the writer of the screenplay for the PBS American documentary, Jerome Robbins, Something to Dance About, which won both an Emmy and a Peabody Award. Educated at Harvard and a fellow at NYU Center for Ballet and the Arts, which you may recall Jennifer Holmes directed. This past spring, she has just completed a volume of selected writings of Jerome Robbins to be published in conjunction with the centenary next October, and is now at work on her next book, a dual biography that is about two women who have been very much on the minds of the theater-going public. The Schuyler sisters, Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton and her sister Angelica Schuyler Church. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Barbaralee. I am delighted and honored to be here. I'm pretty sure that Barbaralee didn't know when she asked me to speak that I had a childhood personal connection to Jerome Robbins and to this very venue that preceded, obviously, my biography Somewhere and my work on Jerome Robbins, Something to Dance About. My childhood home was right across the street on the 8th floor of that brick building there. And as facing outward, I could look right down on this house. And as a girl, I could sometimes see Robbins walking his terrier, Nick, in the neighborhood. And I was heart-stoppingly thrilled because, of course, he had directed Peter Pan, He had choreographed Fanfare, which was on the bill the very first time I ever went to ballet. He had directed and choreographed King and I and Small House of Uncle Thomas and the March of the Siamese Children, which I used to do as a child, to the record. And my jewelry designer grandfather had created, in fact, a whole brood of Siamese children in ivory in honor of Gertrude Lawrence and Dorothy Rogers, who were clients of his. So the idea that a god like that lived across the street from me and walked the earth that I walked was just amazing. But as amazing as it was to me that he was here, it might have been even more surprising to him that he was here, because he had resisted owning anything as substantial and committed as a house for his entire life. When he was offered the chance to buy a house that he had spent much time in Sneeden's Landing up on the Hudson, a house he adored, that had belonged previously or had been lived in previously by Aaron Copland, he dithered and dithered and dithered because he wasn't sure he wanted to have that happen, and in the end the owner sold the house to somebody else. When he was offered by the Comune of Spoleto in Italy, a place he adored, the completely free house, a beautiful stone house on the end of the Ponte delle Torri, and as long as he just lived in it and kept it up for his life, he decided, no, maybe that was not what he wanted to do. It was too much of a commitment. He didn't want to be tied down. He kept thinking, is there a catch in it somewhere? Nah, I don't want it. So he refused. But in 1966, he decided to take the plunge and commit himself to 117 East 81st Street. And it was here, working in his top floor studio, or just reading, thinking, or as he would say, potch-king around in the garden, or the office, or the sitting room, he created some of his most beautiful and lasting work. Not the Broadway shows, because with one exception, his Broadway work ended with Fiddler in 1964, but Dances at a Gathering, In the Night, Goldberg Variations, Watermill, Dybbuk and the Dybbuk Variations, in G major, Other Dances, Four Seasons, Opus 19, piano pieces, Gershwin Concerto, glass pieces, I'm Old-Fashioned, Antique Epigraphs, and Memory of, Ives Songs, Suite of Dances, 2 and 3-part Inventions, and other works as varied and transcendent as anything ever created by a choreographer. This house was also the birthplace of his effort to recapture with those who had originally danced them the lost Broadway dances of the extraordinary career that he had had, an effort that culminated in Jerome Robbins' Broadway, a show that won 6 Tony Awards, including Best Musical and Best Director. It was after the opening of that show that Robbins, who was always his own harshest critic, allowed himself to write the following in a memorandum that he wrote and sealed in an envelope that he stashed in a souvenir program, itself hidden in a suitcase in the basement of this house and only found and opened in the last few months. The show, he wrote, has gone beyond my expectations. The cast and staff and spirit of it are intoxicating. Finally, it's a retrospective of theater, my theater, and I'm so proud, as well as being surprised by how good and tasteful it is. I am so pleased and content that at this point, I feel ready to die happily because I feel so fulfilled and contented with the life I've led. Well, almost 10 years later, he did die in this house. And now we're gathered here to honor the life that he led here. How lucky we are to have enjoyed its fruits and to have this perpetual reminder of him and them in this place. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda Dale. William James Earl, who is the executor the Jerome Robbins estate, was professor of philosophy at both the New College and the City of New York Graduate Center. He was for many years the editor-in-chief of the Philosophical Forum, an international quarterly journal. He holds a doctorate from Columbia University as a former Woodrow Wilson and National Endowment for Humanities Fellow and a specialist in contemporary metaphysics. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Robbins.
The public side of Jerome Robbins is well known, though often misdescribed and misunderstood. He was a perfectionist and an exigent taskmaster. He knew that the details matter. I remember him being upset by a misstep in a ballet, imperceptible to me, and as I said to him by the audience, "They may not see the flaw," he replied, "but the flaw nevertheless diminishes the power of the piece." Everyone, at least everyone standing here, knows that Jerry was a genius who created West Side Story and Fiddler on the Roof and masterpieces, Too Many to Mention, but not by Amanda, choreographed his art. But standing in front of his house, I want to emphasize the private side of Jerry. He was a loving friend to those who were lucky enough to become his friend. I don't know, didn't know then, and don't know now why he liked me. It's always nice to be liked by someone who doesn't like everybody. There are many things I could say about the good times we had in this house. Let me say just one thing about Jerry that made it a privilege to be his friend. He was extraordinarily good at paying attention and listening. This is much rarer than one might suppose. Most people don't bother. They're too busy rehearsing their own self-presentation or fitting the people around them, including wives and husbands and children, into their own self-serving fantasies. Jerry, in contrast, had a very clean and unencumbered take on the world. It made him a great friend and a great artist.
Thank you. Appointed in May 2017, the seventh president designate, please come forward, Damien Wetzel, who also serves as the director of the Aspen Institute Arts Program and artistic director of the annual Vail Dance Festival. In 2008, want to come out? He retired from this illustrious career as a principal dancer of the New York City Ballet. Now an independent director, choreographer, and producer. From 2009 to 2017, Wetzel served on the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, where he helped create the Turnaround Arts Program, which brings arts education to some of the nation's most challenged school districts. I wish you were still doing it. He holds a master's in public administration from Harvard University's Kennedy School, has been a visiting lecturer at Harvard Law School, and in 2015 received the Harvard Arts Medal, which honors a distinguished graduate or faculty member who has achieved excellence in the arts and contributed to education for the public good. And he's only just begun. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. So the perils of going after people. I had a lot to say about Balanchine and Jerry. Thanks, Jennifer. Some things to say about the building. Some things to say about Jerry's discernment and detail. But thankfully, I'm going before Robbie. So I'll try not to take anything from you, Robs. But you know, to me, the story of Jerry is very personal. He is the reason I joined the New York City Ballet in its entirety. But more than that, he's shaped very much the way I look at the arts as a cohesive possibility. That they are not one thing. They are not just dance, they are not just music, they are not just theater, they are not visual art, they are, and it's no surprise in some ways that that long line is, I realize, has led me perhaps where I'm headed. I remember many experiences with Jerry, really thankfully to Bill and to the great lost Aiden, who would be standing here telling us the real deal if we were lucky. When I moved to New York, Aiden Mooney introduced me to Jerry, and Jerry came to see me in class at SAB. And looking for something to share with you today, I was thinking about those first moments, which were kind of being a decisive moment for me. 17 years old, arrived in New York, lots of dreams, and where was I going to go? New York City Ballet or American Ballet Theater or who knows? And those decisions were made for me in those moments with Jerry. He came to watch me take class on a Saturday morning. It was Kramarevsky's class, for those of you who know Krammy, still teaching, holding it down. And you know, we take so much for granted. So many of the things we do on a daily basis we take for granted. We're used to them. And already at the august age of 17, and having been at the School of American Ballet for 2 months, I took Grammy for granted. I understood what I thought I needed to understand. It was an opportunity for me to create my own self-serving picture and presentation for whoever happened to be watching. And at the end of the class, Jerry said some kind of nice things, and then he said, you know, he's right about everything. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the way he stretches a phrase at the end of everything he does is what you're missing. And I said, first of all, I heard you're missing. I was like, oh, missing something. But then I started to think about it. And I've said that myself to so many now generations of young guys who go to SAB and say, watch Grammy, it's actually all there, and you're missing it. But that's a metaphor for so many things about Jerry, that he pointed out things in our lives that we miss. His attention to detail in listening was his attention to detail in explaining for all of us what to see and pointing out things that we might otherwise take for granted. I remember going on a Monday to the Metropolitan Museum with him to see a Caravaggio exhibit. Remember that day? And we did it, I think we went twice. And he, you know, paused in front of a painting and explained why that painting mattered to him. And it was about the light perspective and the way a hand pointed and the way it all lined up. And I thought, I've never forgotten it. It's something that just walks with me. In the same way that he would point out the bass notes in an etude and Dances at a Gathering and tell us that that was actually what mattered, that we needed to tap into. And in the end, he was touching things that we otherwise would miss. And he was pointing out things that, you know, speak to Emerson's definition of genius, that, you know, genius is the thoughts that we reject come back to haunt us in all their rejected majesty. We know them when we see them, but we just, because they're almost in our own heads, but Jerry, they were in his head, and he let us in on those things. And that's what I'm so grateful for among so many memories, just that idea that there's more. There's more to see, and do not take those moments for granted. He was a slave about time. He used to say to us if we were late, you owe me, baby, you owe me 3 minutes. And he meant it. He meant that it really does matter the time we spent. And it was, again, that idea that things matter, that there are details that matter, that they may not have noticed why they had that feeling in the audience, but I know. And you know, and I'm going to make sure you know. So when I think about that, I think about the resonance of this moment, of this gathering, of people who care, and I think about what you're doing here. And I remember being at the Osborne last year last spring to celebrate Leonard Bernstein's medallion, and that idea that there are ghosts among us. There are ghosts among us in this city and in this world that we have to remember, because they made a difference for all of us in our lives in ways that we cannot imagine, but we have to try to. So I think about this house. I remember the first time I came here was New Year's Eve, 1985. We'd had a rehearsal of Glass Pieces on the stage. Jerry screamed at me, told me I was doing so many things wrong, and I'm sure he was holding back. And then later on he said, hey, you know, Aiden and Bill and some people are coming for New Year's Eve. Do you want to come for New Year's Eve? when we came up here, and he rolled a television into the dining room and we watched the ball drop. And I can't believe we get to stand here and say this is where so many things happened and so many things that go on forward. So I want to thank Jerry, and I want to thank you for doing this for all of us. Thank you.
After a 9-year career with American Ballet Theater, Robert LaFosse was invited by Jerome Robbins to join the New York City Ballet as a principal dancer. He originated roles in West Side Story, Quiet City, and Piccolo. His repertoire with New York City Ballet included Balanchine's Agon, Prodigal Son, and Slover on 10th Avenue, and Robbins' Afternoon of the Fawn, Fancy Free, and The Four Seasons. Mr. LaFosse starred in Bob Fosse's Dancing and Jerome Robbins' Broadway, for which he received the 1989 Tony Award nomination for Best Actor in Music. An established choreographer, he has created over 75 works. He's currently on the faculty at the American Ballet Theater's Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis School and performs annually as Herr Grosselmeyer of New York City Ballet's annual production of Balanchine's Nutcracker.
Thank you for inviting me. Hello. I'm very honored to be here today celebrating Jerry's life. He was responsible for giving me so many opportunities in my career as a dancer and an actor. Jerry was not a very public about his private life, so I'm not so sure he would want everyone to know where he lived. But I'm sure that he would want to be remembered, so this is a wonderful tribute. I worked with Jerry for 18 years, and during that time we went to dinner only once, and that was when he asked me to join the New York City Ballet. It was primarily a working relationship, inspired by the love of ballet and theater. And we also loved dogs. Whenever there was a furry animal in the studio, we knew that he would be just a little bit calmer and not take out his frustration on one of the dancers. Unfortunately, I was not to be one of those dancers in my whole career. I want to talk about things that are not on Wikipedia about Jerry, that I find there are actions about Jerry that really define him as a human being. And personally, they speak to me because I didn't know Jerry very well personally. I knew him in the studio, and I respected his love and passion, which sometimes came off as some people thought he was angry and mean, but he was really not that. What I saw was a man that was truly going for the truth all the time. He wanted the truth. I think Damien spoke so eloquently about that. Jerry was deeply and personally affected by the AIDS crisis. I'm a man living with HIV for 35 years now, and I've witnessed all the devastation of the disease, and lucky to be standing here today remembering Jerry. On October 5th, 1987, Jerry was the artistic coordinator of Dancing for Life, the first AIDS benefit where the dance community came together to raise money for education, care, and research related to AIDS. It was a remarkable event where 13 companies came together to honor those fallen from the plague. Robbins said, however, we want to make it better than that, always wanting perfection. We want to show the community's spirit, and I think we will. And we did. It was an extraordinary event. Mark Morris created a new ballet for ABT with Mikhail Baryshnikov. George Balanchine's Symphony in C was performed as a finale by dancers from New York City Ballet, American Ballet Theater, Dance Theater of Harlem, and Joffrey Ballet. The event raised $1.4 million. And of course, this is not all that Jerry did for the cause. He personally gave money from the royalties of Fiddler on the Roof to many AIDS organizations. Since 1944, when it was founded as a separate department of the New York Public Library, the Dance Division has creatively explored many ways in which dance, an art form that exists in the moment of performance, can be recorded, preserved, made accessible, and most importantly, kept alive. The collection encompasses every kind of dance: ballet, modern, historical, tap, social, folk, ethnic, and rituals, and related movement arts. One of the Dance Division's generous longtime supporters was Jerry, who recalled the importance of the New York Public Library in his own childhood. On his death in 1998, Robbins willed his entire personal archives to the library, along with additional financial support from the Jerome Robbins Foundation. And then in 1999, the Dance Division was named in his honor. Before that, in 1980, Jerry provided the seed money through the Jerome Robbins Foundation to inaugurate the Dancers Emergency Fund. The fund was created to help city ballet dancers through sudden, devastating personal emergencies and help provide medical cost and emotional support. I spoke to my friend Sean Lavery the other day, who was, of course some of you know, he was a principal dancer with New York City Ballet, and he asked me to share his story and gratitude for the fund. Despite lacking the proper finances to pay for his surgeries or rehabilitation, he was supported emotionally and financially by the Dancers Emergency Fund, which really touches me because Sean had to retire from dancing earlier because of this spinal cord operation that he had to have, and that was, Jerry was very concerned about dancers and their personal being, not only just what they could do for him on the stage, and this was the way that he was concerned. And in fact, the fund is still there, accruing money, and very few people know about it. Although I don't consider myself a close friend, I feel like I knew a private side of the artist that most friends never get to experience. The times in the studio, the watching him create a work out of his head. There were moments where I'm a choreographer as well, and watching him be inspired by this thing that would just drop on his head all of a sudden out of nowhere and then come into his body was an extraordinary event. And I will always cherish that. His memory will always be with me, and I'm very grateful that everything he gave me as an artist. So thank you.
The last speaker called this morning, at her office call this morning. She came to New York and stayed to be present at this gathering, but had a small accident. I hope it is only a small accident, and cannot be with us. But one of the things she said in our exchanges to the run-up of today was how her gratitude, and I'm talking about Anne Reinke now, for all that had been done for her. And of course she has done so much for so many. Not only as a dancer, but her award-winning documentaries, including Two Worlds, One Planet, about high-functioning autism, and In My Hands, about Marfan syndrome. But she said, and I'd like to quote that, and wish her a speedy return to perfect health. She has said that without the scholarships from the Ford Foundation, the Robert Joffrey Ballet, gifts of my teachers, and wonderful directors and choreographers, the struggle would probably have killed me. I am forever in their debt, and thank them, but at least wanted to share those words. And now it is time to dedicate this cultural medallion. Frank and Deborah will come up. But I want to thank each and all of you for joining us today, and for gathering to celebrating the life and work of Jerome Robbins here where history happened. And again, our thanks to our hosts, the current residents of this building. Thanks to all.
Jerome Robbins, October 11, 1918 to July 29, 1998. Internationally acclaimed dancer, choreographer, and director Jerome Robbins lived and worked here from 1967 to 1998. Many of the more than 60 ballets he created, including Fancy Free, Afternoon of a Faun, and Dances at a Gathering, remain in the repertories of New York City Ballet and other major dance companies. His ballets and Broadway shows, including On the Town, West Side Story, Peter Pan, Gypsy, and Fiddler on the Roof, continue to bring the artistry of dance to millions worldwide through stage, television, and motion pictures. The recipient of numerous awards, including 2 Academy Awards for the film West Side Story, Robbins' gift of royalties to the dance division of the New York Public Library for Performing Arts and his establishment of the foundation in 1957 ensured that his legacy fosters the cultural life of New York City and the world.